All right, so thank you, Sangeeta and Tarek, for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be back and to facilitate this hot topic portion of today's Marvel seminar. So I titled my talk AI, GPT, and the Future of Biology, kind of a very grand vision, because I think we're right now at this time of being on the cusp of some really, really grand things. And so what I've done today is I've prepared a bit of material. I have 10 slides or so that's designed to give an overview of kind of where we're at with these technologies and what fundamentally they're doing and how to understand them at a core intuitive basis. And I'll go through that, and I'm hoping that we can use the remaining time for discussion and question and answer, and I'll try to answer your questions to the best of my ability, acknowledging that I do not speak, on behalf of all the individuals who have contributed to some of this work. Okay, so to set the stage, I think we're now well past the point where we've acknowledged that AI, deep learning, machine learning has tremendous potential for biology and medicine, from the ability to diagnose disease, looking at things like medical images, to understanding biology on the fundamental level, such as in the case of protein structure prediction, to even being able to generatively design new therapeutics and discover new drugs. Now, what is common across all three of these cases and thrusts that I've highlighted is that so far we've largely thought of artificial intelligence and AI in this specialist kind of way, where we design a specific AI system for a biological task, like solving protein structure prediction, by leveraging biological data, such as data on protein sequences and their corresponding structures. Now we're at the cusp of starting to go forward with a new paradigm that's emerging, which is this idea of taking a very general AI system, what people in the field often call foundation models, that are designed not specifically for biology, but are designed agnostic to any specific task. And now thinking about how we can use these AI systems to accelerate biology, accelerate medicine, and aid us in the problems that we care about. So the context for this has really been accelerated and thrust into the forefront of our culture and society by the rise of ChatGPT, which, how many of you here have used ChatGPT? Okay, most, if not most people, not everyone. But what ChatGPT is it's a framework developed by this organization, OpenAI, in close partnership with Microsoft, that is a web interface. And on the back end is an AI system. And what you can do is effectively, it's a very, very, very powerful chatbot where you can go and submit queries, entries to this interface, ChatGPT, and it will generate outputs for you depending on what you inputted. And we're going to talk a little bit about the basic premise of this and what's going on under the hood. But it's to say that it's transformed, the way society thinks about AI would be, I can't emphasize how publicly like a technology like this has come to light enough, because in fact, at least in my knowledge, I don't think there has been something like this that's taken society by storm to the extent that it has. What you may not know is that just 1 week ago, OpenAI released a new model called GPT-4 that is even more powerful than the model underlying ChatGPT. And the pace at which this field is moving, right? This GPT-4 was released exactly 6 days ago. ChatGPT was released in late November. It's really breakneck. It's really a staggering pace. And the capabilities of this latter model, GPT-4, you may have seen on Twitter or elsewhere in the press, things like it's passing the bar exam, it's acing all of the AP exams, it's completing software engineering interviews at the level of a experienced software engineer, are just kind of these benchmarks that OpenAI has put out to try to highlight some of the capabilities that this model has in this realm of natural language in particular. So this is kind of the cultural moment that we're in. But fundamentally, right, I've used this term GPT, I've used this term AI. What exactly are these? What do they mean? Well, when we think of AI or artificial intelligence, I like to think of it in the lens of any computational technique that is aimed at trying to enable computers to mimic or model human behavior in some capacity, in some respect. Now, within AI, there's a subfield called deep learning. And deep learning is the subfield of AI that's risen dramatically over recent years. And the core commonality to deep learning is that these are methods that use these computer models called neural networks to try to automatically extract patterns of information from large amounts of data. Within deep learning, there's a subfield under that we call large language models, or LLMs for short. And what LLMs are these very, 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 very large neural networks, extremely large, trained on very, very, very large quantities of text-based data. And so more specifically, GPT is an example of a large language model, or an LLM. And all an LLM is trying to do is it's trying to model a probability distribution over some large sequence of words or a large body of text. And why GPT is called GPT is that it's an acronym, right? 3 letters stand for something. G means it's generative. What this means, and you know this if you've interacted with ChatGPT, is that it generates an output that is in the form of text. The P stands for pre-trained. And this takes a little bit of an unpacking, so I'll discuss it a little further. What that means is that this model was previously trained on a very large, completely unannotated body of text. So when you go and you interface with ChatGPT, the model underlying it is not actually updating anything about its internal configuration, right? It's a static, what we think of as a frozen model. It's static, it's put. All it's taking is it's taking your input and then using the information from the input to condition or alter how it responds as an output. So that's what we mean when this term pre-trained. And finally, the T stands for transformer, which is just a type of neural network that is used in a model like ChatGPT. And I won't talk about what a transformer is. It's not particularly important for this overview and for this intuition. So getting into it a little further, right? I mentioned that this model is very large. It leverages a lot of data. How exactly does that work? When we talk about a lot of data, this is billions upon billions or trillions of words of level of data. So some common data sets that are used are this data set called Common Crawl, which is like this data set of web data from over 12 years of all activity and queries and searches, so on and so forth, and all content that's present on the web. And prior to this data being fed into building a model like GPT, how this data is processed is by effectively splitting it up into smaller pieces, chunks. And this is a process that we call tokenization. So tokens are just chunks of this text, and those tokens are then used to train or learn the model GPT. And to give you a sense of scale, the previous state-of-the-art model, GPT-3, had 175 billion individual parameters. And a parameter here is a value in this deep learning model that can then be updated and changed as a function of as it's seeing this data, okay? We don't know how many parameters GPT-4 has. No one, it's not public information. And so we don't have a sense of the scale, the delta that we've achieved relative to a previous model like GPT-3. So this lays out that we have some data, text, a lot of it, and we have this underlying model, this neural network GPT-3, that we're now trying to put them together in some way. Now, the core aspect of machine learning or deep learning, if you may be familiar, is this process we refer to as training. And what that means is how we actually link the data to the model in a way such that those 175 billion parameters can be iteratively updated according to the data that the model has taken as input. And over this process of training or learning, the idea is that these parameters of the model change their values over time to eventually reach a point where now the model is a good mimic of that distribution of text that it's seen. And if there's one thing that I want you to take away from this talk, it's that the way that this model is trained, is learned, is developed is actually very, very, very simple. At its core, all this model does to basically learn is to take this data set and given a sequence of these chunks of text, these tokens, what it's tasked to do is predict what is the most likely next token in a sequence, given that I've seen some number of these tokens previously. And as a function of doing this many, many times iteratively, this model is then updated, and you can imagine it goes through, this very massive amount of data. This process takes a lot of time, so on and so forth. But really, it's a very, very simple objective: next token prediction. And that's all happens at the back end, right? That's what happens prior to you interfacing with a model like ChatGPT, where what we're now used to and what we're seeing is when we go into the ChatGPT interface, we give it a prompt. For example, I'm giving a talk on AI at the Marble Center seminar. Can you outline it for me? And that's an abbreviated version of a prompt that I actually gave to GPT-4, which is in Bing's search functionality, chat search functionality. And it will outline, this is a condensed version of the outline that it gave me. Maybe you start with an introduction, maybe you give an overview of the Marble Center, maybe you talk about AI in cancer research, and then maybe you say something to conclude, right? So this latter part that I'm showing is how we interface with these models today. And we can think about more relevant examples to questions that we have in things like searching the literature or trying to determine some aspect of encoded biological knowledge. So also a few months ago in November 2022, a group of my colleagues at Microsoft Research published this work, BioGPT, which is a similar model, but it's only seeing scientific articles from PubMed. And so you can give this model BioGPT a prompt like, what is the drug that can treat COVID-19? And it's generating some text output with information about hydroxychloroquine, which there was some, we know is not, safe and efficacious for treating COVID-19. In contrast, now the updated GPT-4 model accessed through Bing Chat, released in February 2023, produces this response in reply to that same exact prompt, where now we have reputable outputs as well as some citations pointing back to the scientific works and websites from the FDA that cite these drugs. Now, granted, there's an aspect of this to more recent training data, but the functionality is certainly stronger. So what does this mean for where we are at with the application of GPT for biology, medicine right now? What's feasible, what's reliable right now? In my view, I think there's a general theme of using these models as a co-pilot across three areas: knowledge retrieval, writing, and planning. And I could go into more depth about any of these, but for the sake of time, because I want to show a couple other slides, I will not. But these are all rooted in the fact that these models have very, very high mastery over natural language. And fundamentally, you can think of these tasks as ways we interface with language in writing, in querying knowledge, and in planning and executing steps. So one big criticism and question that's arisen in this field is, can these models like ChatGPT or GPT go beyond this idea of knowledge retrieval? And a lot of people in machine learning say no, that fundamentally, right, remember, if you think about this framework of next token prediction, modeling this probability distribution, effectively what they're doing is memorizing data, and then when you give a prompt, going back in that distribution and pulling out the most relevant information. But we know through empirical studies and experiments that with these new models, as they're getting bigger and bigger with scale, that in fact they do go beyond knowledge retrieval. And in particular, there's a lot of interest and excitement around what we think of these emergent abilities, which mean something that's present in these larger scale models that's not present in smaller models and goes beyond this framework of simple knowledge retrieval. And I think an example that really showcases that is these results that were from a paper from earlier this fall, where they looked at different types of tasks in language and also in other domains, and showed very clearly that as you scale model size, there's this sharp inflection point where now these models can perform well on these more complicated, higher level tasks like structuring language, understanding phonetics and pronunciation, where smaller models cannot. And this goes beyond language to even now looking at things like arithmetic operations and simple math, where again, as the model gets bigger, there's this inflection point where now you get higher and higher accuracies on these types of higher level tasks. And indeed, I think this visualization from this blog post highlights it very effectively, where, as you can see, as we're growing the scale of the model in terms of the number of parameters, there's the emergence of these new, these higher level capabilities that are now making a lot of people think about how these models are a step towards achieving more powerful AI and capabilities in this manner. Okay, so to close, and I know that this has been a whirlwind very quickly, but I want to highlight a few key limitations that exist with models like ChatGPT and GPT, ranging from an understanding of their robustness. So what happens if we deliberately insert mistakes into these prompts that we supply something like ChatGPT? Can it handle these mistakes? Can it give a sensible response in light of these mistakes? To these failure modes that people term hallucinations, where you're interfacing with ChatGPT, it's spitting out a bunch of text outputs, and it seems really plausible, it seems coherent, but in fact, if you inspect further, there are errors in its output that are not true, but seem really believable. To ways that people have now investigated to effectively hack these systems and jailbreak them, and the fact that humans had to do a lot of manual testing on setting up particular guardrails around things like bias and things like harmful outputs, and effectively give this in as manual feedback to the model as it was being developed. And finally, we know that a lot of capabilities around numerical computations, abstract reasoning with respect to logic are still a key failure mode for these models. I think what is particularly exciting about these challenges and presents a lot of opportunity is that a lot of these things that I'm touching on here are directly linked to what we think of as the cornerstones of the scientific process in doing empirical research, being guarantees around factuality and robustness, the ability to plan things in a longer term horizon, and of course, do make logical reasoning and aid in scientific discovery. So that, I know it was hopefully a good primer and overview, and I will just close by saying that at Microsoft Research, we have a team focused on developing machine learning and AI solutions for challenges and problems in biology, from the scale of molecule design and protein engineering all the way to the patient level and thinking about statistical genetics and predictive modeling. So with that, my email is there. I know we ran a little over time, but if people are willing to stay, I'm happy to answer any questions that I can.